In the dusty town of Meadowville, 15-year-old Hannah Pierce faced an unthinkable fate. Sold into marriage by her own stepfather, Vernon, a man who saw her only as a debt to be settled. Vernon's callous disregard for her humanity, coupled with the predatory gaze of Jud Buckner, painted a grim picture of despair. But an unexpected quiet cowboy, Calvin Mace, stepped into the church, forever altering the course of Hannah's life. This is the harrowing tale of how an act of courage ignited a fierce battle for freedom, proving that even in the darkest corners, justice can prevail. The summer of 1881 in Laramie County, Wyoming, was dry and dusty. In the morning, a roofless wagon traveled down Meadowville's main street, thoroughly permeated with horse manure and human indifference. In it, amid sacks of flowers, sat a girl of about 15, her head bowed, clutching her dress as her last defense. Her wrist bore fresh abrasions. She didn't cry. There was no point. Her eyes looked at passers-by, silently but sharply, as if pleading, begging someone, anyone, to say something. Her name was Hannah Pierce. Ever since her mother died of fever 3 months ago, her life had turned into a rotting cellar, literally and figuratively. Her stepfather, Vernon Pierce, a saloon keeper and gambler, had lost everything. His wife, his money, his credibility. The only thing he had left, an asset, as he called it, was Hannah. He began talking about debts and ways to pay them off. And in a small town, debts were often paid not only with money. "She's healthy, clean, not lazy," he told a man in a suit who held his hat to his chest as if already at a funeral. "But she's 15, Vernon," the town mayor quietly objected. "But a virgin. You know Jud Buckner's been looking at her for a long time. How much longer will she be a girl? Women in the West don't have an age, they have a price." And so today she was being driven to a small, shabby church on the outskirts. There Buckner, a 35-year-old blacksmith, waited with a ring. His fingers smelled of smoke and grease, and his smile was as if he were choosing a calf. Before the altar stood a priest with trembling hands. Hannah understood nothing as she was pushed forward. Everything was like a dream, only a very dirty, sticky dream. "Say yes," Vernon hissed, gripping her shoulder. She sobbed. I can't." Spurs scraped at the doorway. Everyone turned. A tall, lean man in a dusty duster stood on the threshold. He said nothing. He just looked at Hannah, and then at Buckner. Jud choked and cursed. "Who are you, anyway?" he began. "The one who can shoot before the count of 2, the man said calmly and stepped into the aisle. It was Calvin Mace, a quiet cowboy, without land, without family. They said he hadn't spoken more than a dozen words in 3 years. He walked up to Vernon, took off his glove and threw it at his feet. "You sold a person. You are nothing." Then he turned to Buckner. "And you won't take her, because I am taking her." "Are you going to marry her?" Someone laughed. Calvin turned to the priest. "You can say the words, now and quickly. I am her husband. From this moment." Hannah stood rooted to the spot, and then she cried, for the first time since her mother died. But these were different tears, not from fear, but because someone, for the first time, saw in her not a debt, not merchandise, but a human being. "No one asked me," she whispered. Calvin bent down and said, "I just stood where you stood alone." And she nodded. They left town before sunset, when shadows stretched like the arms of past mistakes. Calvin rode with her, not for romance, but because there was only one horse. She sat sideways, pressed against his chest, not looking at his face. He was silent, and so was she. The air was thick, like before a storm, but neither the sky nor they could release the thunder. They stopped at an abandoned hunting lodge. It smelled of dry wood and thyme. He pointed to the door. "This is your home, until you say otherwise." She entered as if into someone else's memory. There was a table, 2 chairs, an old lamp. A simple bedroll lay on the floor. Hannah stood by the window, motionless. "Do you have a wife?" she suddenly asked. Calvin shook his head. "I did 5 years ago, mountains, winter. Buried her myself." She didn't ask what happened, just nodded. That night he slept by the door, rifle on his lap, and she, under a blanket, curled up as if trying to hide inside herself. She trembled, but not from cold, not from fear, from the fact that in the last day she had, for the first time, seen how she could live, and now she feared losing that more than herself. On the third day, they came for them. The door didn't creak. It was broken down. Hannah woke to the sound of footsteps and a loud shout. "Calvin, bring her out. This deal is illegal." Vernon. Behind him, the deputy sheriff and Buckner himself. The latter had the face of a beast whose meat had been taken. Calvin stood up silently without a rifle, but there was enough in his gaze to make the three men freeze. "We have the paper," Vernon shouted, waving a scroll. "She's not 16. The wedding is a sham. This is kidnapping." Hannah came out behind Calvin, her hands trembling. "No," she said, "I left on my own. I'm not yours, not a thing." The deputy sheriff, an old man in blue trousers, averted his eyes. Buckner stepped forward. "And I'll say you tricked him, girl. Lured him, like all the others before." At that moment, Calvin spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut like a knife through skin. "Say one more word, and I'll return you to the forge, in pieces." Silence became a weapon. The deputy looked at the girl, then at Vernon. "I have no warrant. You left. She's not crying. I have no case." Vernon hissed, "You'll pay for this, Mace." Calvin slowly walked up to him. "Already paid, with bullets, with a wife, with a life. Want to add more?" Vernon retreated. Buckner, too. They left like beaten dogs. But from then on, Hannah knew. Their revenge wasn't over. She knew how men you didn't belong to sought revenge. 2 weeks passed. She began to wash the floor in the mornings, to cook. He never ordered, but she did it. Sometimes she sat on the porch looking at the stars, and she thought how strange it was. This man demanded nothing from her, and precisely because of that, she wanted to give him everything. "Won't you live with me properly?" she asked once. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "When you are a woman, by your own will, not someone else's, I will wait." And she cried, but these were pure tears. At dawn a month later, their barn caught fire. In the smoke was the smell of kerosene and revenge. Hannah screamed, and Calvin was already running with buckets. But when the fire died down, a cross lay on the ground, carved with a knife, and next to it a sign, "Return what is not yours." This was war. They hadn't left. They were waiting for their moment, and Calvin knew silence would no longer save them. After the fire, life split into before and after. The fire consumed the hayloft, the stable, and half their supplies. But Hannah didn't cry. She herself took up a rake, cleared the ashes, pulled out nails, burned her hands, and didn't say a word. Only in the evening, she sat next to Calvin and asked, "Do you think they'll come back?" He looked at her for a long time. "Yes, but next time, not at night." Every night she woke at the slightest sound. Calvin slept on the floor by the door, the rifle nearby. Days were spent on rebuilding. He built a new stable, and she helped as best she could. She learned to hold a hammer, flinched at the clang, but didn't back down. And one day as he was sawing boards, she walked up and took the saw from him. "Teach me. If they come back, I don't want to hide behind your back again." He just nodded. From then on, they worked together every evening, and he noticed how she changed. Her hands, stronger, her gaze, direct, and her laugh, real at last. As if something within her, suppressed by years of pain, was coming alive. On Saturday, they went to town for flour and salt. Hannah went out into the street for the first time without fear. Holding a basket, she didn't hide her eyes, didn't lower her head. Local wives looked on with surprise. "Is that her? The one? Vernon's girl?" And an old man on the general store porch tipped his hat and muttered, "You're holding up well, dear." When Calvin came out with a sack on his shoulders, he noticed she was surrounded. 2 women and Buckner, standing a little distance away. "Are you his girl now?" one hissed. "Do you think no one knows where you came from?" Hannah didn't answer. She just looked directly into her eyes. The woman suddenly fell silent, as if something broke inside her. Buckner smirked but didn't approach. And then Calvin understood. They weren't just afraid of her. They were afraid that she had become stronger. That same night, sitting by the fire, she said, "I want everything to be real. Not as a fugitive, not as a guest. I want to be your wife, Calvin. But not because I have to, but because I chose to." He said nothing. He just took her palm and kissed it. "Then we're going to Laramie. There's a court there. It's fair there. Without Vernon." The next morning they packed a small bundle, a few coins, and set off. The road to Laramie was long, 2 days in the saddle, under the scorching sun and the night's cold. They slept under one blanket, but didn't touch. Hannah sat by the fire and watched Calvin sleep. his forehead scarred, his hands calloused, his heart, unlike anything anyone had shown her before. Just at the bridge, 3 hours from town, they were overtaken. 6 riders. Among them, Vernon, Buckner, and 4 more mercenaries. They were armed and their horses were trotting. Calvin stopped his horse, shielding Hannah. "Right," he said. "Fast, to the court. It's safe there. I'll hold them off." "I won't leave you," she cried. "You're not leaving. You're going where we both intended to go. For both of us." He turned his horse and rode straight into the column, and she, forward. Tears and dust blurred her vision, but she didn't stop. Behind, screams, gunshots. Ahead, the road, destiny, justice. She reached Laramie close to noon, her horse barely breathing. The court clerk was stunned when the girl in a dusty dress with bruised lips ran inside. "Please, register us. My last name will be Mace, by love, by truth." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Then sign here. He can confirm when he arrives, if he arrives." She trembled as she took the quill, but her hand didn't falter. Hannah sat on the bench in the courthouse hall until evening. The dust from her boots had become part of the floor, and her eyes were dry. Outside it grew dark. Each time the doors creaked, she stood up. But it wasn't him, not Calvin. The judge was about to leave. Then she stood up and quietly said, "He went to stop them, 1 against 6. I don't know if he's alive, but if his name isn't written next to mine, I will leave here unmarried, and you will know there was truth, but no one protected it." The judge looked at her as at a fire that seemed to have gone out, but still smoldered beneath the ashes. He sighed, nodded, and whispered, "All right, if he appears before morning, we will certify it. That is my word." The sound of hoofbeats woke her at 5 a.m. An old ranger from Cheyenne stood at the door, his face tired. "Are you Hannah Mace?" he asked. "I am. Where is he?" "He's alive. Barely made it to the outpost. 3 are dead. 1 wounded. We apprehended Buckner. Vernon, dead. He put himself in the line of fire, tried to kill Mace, but Calvin was faster. He's on his way." She didn't answer. She just collapsed to her knees. Calvin appeared in the courthouse doorway at sunset. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, a bandage on his neck. But he was standing. "Am I too late?" he rasped. The judge smiled. "You made it, son. If you can hold a pen, sign." Calvin turned to Hannah. "You did all this. You are the light. I just followed it." She nodded. "And now come with me to the end of this road." He signed. Hannah, too. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was silence in the room. Only the warm light of the setting sun fell upon their faces, not as fugitives, but as those who had triumphed. A month later, they returned to the ranch. Hannah held a real marriage certificate in her hands, and in her pocket, a letter from the Rangers. "You acted in self-defense. Testimonies confirmed. Case closed." She stood on the porch where she had once stood with bruised hands and fear in her chest, and took a deep breath. "This is our home now, not a hiding place, not a cage, home." Calvin chuckled, holding her shoulders. "And you are my wife now, and no one else decides who you are." In the spring, she planted roses by the window, and one day a girl, about 10 years old, came into town, dirty with cuts on her face. Hannah went out to her, just as Calvin had once come to her. "You're not alone. Come, we have bread and freedom." And that's how their new life began, with one yes spoken at the courthouse door, and one enough, whispered by the campfire. Because truth cannot be burned, because love is not merchandise, because one day a quiet cowboy called her wife, and thereby broke her chains.